that COVID brought to the world and how the markets that came pre and post COVID. This presentation was made by Victoria, Diego, and Ariane.
All right, so to begin, we'll start with the pre-COVID global economy. And pre-COVID, the global economies relied on being connected with each other and maximizing efficiency by everyone having their own comparative advantages. And as such, this idea of comparative advantage ties in with principle 5, which is that trade can make everybody better off. And because each country had its own specialized niche that affected the global opportunity costs, and as such, each nation focuses on whatever they have a lower opportunity cost, and that promotes efficiency overall. And there are also trade-offs and considerations for resource allocation. And in principle 1, it ties in with this, where people face trade-offs. So globalization, it allowed countries to focus on what was efficient for their production, but it also made them dependent on other nations for other goods that have higher opportunity costs for them. And as such, this phenomenon exposed some issues when global trade had to come to an abrupt halt.
Okay, so the impact of COVID on the global economy. So how exactly did COVID impact the economy? Well, COVID brought restrictions that led to supply chain bottlenecks. This affected sectors all the way from electronics to healthcare. Other certain goods that were essential during the pandemic, for example, medical supplies, masks, they all have inelastic demand, which caused when shortages came, this led to rapid price increases and economic inefficiencies. This ties back to principle 2 of economics, the cost of something is what you give up to get it. Since global lockdowns and limited movement had an opportunity, cost of lost productivity and revenue in sectors like tourism, aviation, and manufacturing.
So I created this graph to kind of represent the changes and the shifts in the supply and demand curves. S1 and D1 are pre-COVID curves, but post-COVID, you can see that S1 moved to S2, and this is a left shift because of production disruptions. And D1 to D2 is a right shift and increased demand for like healthcare and technology. Once again, how the pandemic disrupted supply chains, leading to higher prices for scarce goods, or boosted demand for sectors like healthcare and technology.
So of course, with all this, the government had to intervene. This ties back to principle 7, so governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. Massive stimulus packages were sent out. These were aimed to support demand and prevent the economic collapse. However, these also came with trade-offs, since stimulus stimulus measures prevented immediate recession, but also increased national debts and also risk inflation. Many countries now face long-term economic impacts due to increased government spending and debt.
This is something I want to add to that. As you can tell in today's economy, there's a lot of inflation. You can even say that there's an amount of hyperinflation. We all remember stimulus checks in the middle of COVID. Everybody liked those stimulus checks at the moment, but now we're definitely facing some of the downsides of those stimulus checks. Inflation, like we said the other day in class, like the prices of eggs, milk, even just like more inferior goods are rising just because of like these situations that happened during COVID.
And now take a look at the emerging markets post-COVID. So COVID brought some interesting challenges, and as such, different sectors had to step up to the plate due to increased demand. So for example, the healthcare and tech industries had a major boom, and those created some new opportunities in the market. For example, we can think about Zoom. After everyone started working remotely, Zoom had a meteoric rise. And this can tie in with principle 3, which is that rational people think at the margin. Various businesses and governments had to shift their resources towards tech and health and communication to help meet these new demands.
I also created this PPF diagram. Pre-COVID, you can see that there's more there's less prioritization of essential goods. Countries focus more on producing things that they had lower opportunity costs for, but post-COVID, there's an outward shift in producing essential goods, and this kind of just shows the reallocation of resources, because that's what needed to happen in the economy to help the people that needed to be helped during COVID. And I feel like this continues on today. There's a lot more focus on technology and healthcare, and I feel like this post-COVID PPF diagram is still kind of maintained today, even though it's been a few years since COVID. I think that many companies kind of have the same maintenance of their allocation of resources, and kind of just prove that people change to what the market needs.
And then this was when self-reliance policies came into play, and Principle 4, people respond to incentives, plays in nicely here. Because, of course, there was some separation where each market had its own specialty, many economies had to introduce incentives to increase production of things that they weren't specialized in. And they had to increase domestic production so that future shortages would not happen, and also encouraging in critical sectors such as the healthcare and making equipment for the medical field.
So we'll look at a case study of a developing country. In this case, we look at India. So India, pre-COVID, their economy thrived on the low-cost labor force, outsourcing, and IT services. India's IT sector actually benefited from English proficiency and a young workforce, which captured a significant share of the global services market. However, post-COVID, there was a boom in adoption of digital payments in India, and this ties back to Principle 6 of economics. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity, since these digital markets provided an efficient and easy way of supporting remote transactions, and it also reduced dependence on physical currency. There was also Made in India initiative, which ties back to the Principle 10 of trade-offs between inflation and unemployment, since India actually started investing a lot in local manufacturing to stimulate employment, although despite the risk of inflation from increased domestic spending on production, it was something that they needed to do.
And then in contrast, we can take a look at a developed nation such as the US. And pre-COVID, the economy in the US was driven mainly by consumer spending, and this benefited greatly from the tech, finance, and healthcare sectors. Post-COVID though, because of that high dependence on consumer spending, when consumer trends changed and the labor market had to adjust, there was an increase in remote work. And this really changed the labor market entirely, and that's part of what led to this huge growth in the software and communication space. And this ties in with Principle 4, that people respond to incentives. Since companies needed to remain competitive despite having to rely less on in-person labor, they offered remote work instead to help attract talent. And this changed the office space demand quite a bit. For example, my mom, she works at a facility that handles payments for a major hospital. And before, everyone was working in the office 5 days a week. But when they shift to a more hybrid workforce, now the employees only come in 1 day a week. So when their lease was up for their office space, they moved to a smaller office because they no longer needed to house everybody at the same time. So that's just one example of how these urban economic structures changed. And we can also bring up Principle 2 of opportunity cost again. The US had to reconsider its reliance on foreign goods and foreign markets, and to prioritize supply chain security over bringing in low-cost imports only. especially in important sectors like semiconductors and the pharmaceutical industry. However, this does bring the risk of long-term inflation, because due to stimulus spending and increasing domestic production costs, that brings risk of inflation as the economy has to abruptly adjust to this realignment.
Here's a comparative advantage model. You can see that pre-COVID, India focused on what they were good at, their IT production, and you can tell that from pre-COVID to post-COVID, there was more focus on healthcare, technology, like I had explained here in the PPF diagram, that these shifts had to happen in order to continue to support the market and how it's been changing post-COVID. India and the US shifted their focus during COVID-19. India diversified its manufacturing for critical supplies instead of more technology and manufactured goods that are non-essentials, while the US increased production of essential technology and healthcare, which they were already the main leaders in. However, because of how the economy had changed and what was needed for people and healthcare, they had to produce more of it. So for benefits, there were a lot more job opportunities in the US. However, the resources remained the same, which made it difficult for them to actually produce that amount of goods. But I feel like in our economy right now, you can tell that they did a very good job of doing more for the technology that needed to happen. And clearly, we have the COVID vaccine, and it was created in a matter of months. So I feel like the brains that we have in the US and all over the world, they came together and did what needed to happen.
So now we'll look at the international trend changes and how the economic landscape changed. So at first we said that pre-COVID, the world operated on a global scale for supply and demand. After COVID, it switched to a regionalization, more of a regionalization. For example, RCEP in Asia, and this ties back to Principle 5, which trade can make everyone better. They emphasize on the efficiency and security of regional trade partnerships, which reduce the dependence on distant economies and minimize supply chain disruptions because the supply chain is a lot smaller.
And I also want to add, like, another example of this would be like the North American Free Trade Agreement. So like with the auto industry, for example, there are incentives for even companies that are based in other countries to bring their car plants into either Canada, the US, or Mexico, and they won't face the same tariffs as if they're producing their cars in Japan or South Korea. So all the major auto companies, Ford, GM, etc., they've built plants in these nations, even if they're from other markets, to increase production domestically and to reduce tariffs.
There was also a shift in the healthcare sector because governments and businesses started prioritizing investing in the healthcare and digital infrastructure, which emphasized self-sufficiency. This also ties back to Principle 7. Governments can sometimes improve market outcomes because health crisis requires government intervention to stabilize the economy, which is what's demonstrated by increasing spending on R&D, infrastructure, and overall technology. These are works cited.
Idea which you can add for the post-COVID development of such area market. You have talked about healthcare, you have talked about, but you didn't touch about education. So any idea that you can tell us about how this post-COVID scenario can have the impact on education sector?
Yeah, I think we all lived through it. I think that online classes were a big shift. I believe that it impacted education a lot because it wasn't the same. People weren't paying as much attention. So I believe it had a great impact.
I remember there was a huge controversy, I think it was with Northwestern, where they were charging the same tuition cost for their classes, but they weren't offering as many, and they were doing it online. So students were like, okay, why aren't we being charged the same rate as online universities? Why do we still have to pay the high tuition rates of a brick and mortar university? So it brought some interesting questions for the education sector as well.
Yes, so online tutoring, online education program, but don't you think as a student of economics that this education impact can create a kind of social damage in terms of disparity? That means rich and poor, they are not getting the equal accessibility. Any impact do you think?
I completely agree with the differentiation between rich and poor. I don't like to use those words particularly, but we're all here at university. We all pay tuition and we have this advantage of learning this material and talking about something like this. Whereas students that don't have that opportunity, they don't really, it's hard for them to understand more of like what needs to happen or what actually happened in the global economy. And I feel that lack of education only then further like accentuates and exacerbates like continuing an issue. Like we're gonna continue on after this class and understand that this is what happened and how it happened. Whereas students who didn't learn that, they're gonna continue to be people in the economy, but with that lack of education. And I feel like some mistakes will continue to happen because of that lack of education.
Yes, correct. Specifically for the online stuff, everybody will need the laptop. But think about some developing countries, there are many families, they could not afford to buy laptop or the proper internet connection. For them, they are actually staying in a very corner, in a black zone. But because of the money problem, that's why.
Personally, I'm from Honduras. I remember I was blessed enough to have the opportunity to have a laptop and a good school, but the majority of the people there, they don't even have access to normal schools. Like they don't have desks in their schools. They live in remote villages. So when COVID hit, there was no way they would take a hike 30 minutes. They couldn't even do that. And they don't know what a laptop is, they don't have internet. So the majority of the people in Honduras, they just went blackout for a few years. And I feel like that leaves a generation of uneducated people.
This is a very, very important observation, that everything today what you have told us, that is very positive impact to the society. We are using the poison into a terms of COVID as a poison, we are using it for the medicine effect on the society, but in spite of that, there are some black holes in the society. Not in America, maybe we can see that, because here at least laptop is not that much unaffordable to majority of the population, but there are some parts of the world, they don't even have that digital connection. So it's a digitally divided world. Thank you so much.